You up, buddy? Yeah. Good luck, man.
How y'all doing? Ooh, you sound good. All right, thank you. Larry O'Brien was short even for a 9-year-old and a ginger. I was 7 and I preferred the company of Nintendo to human children. So it was a bit of a stretch when we both found ourselves enrolled in a strip mall taekwondo studio over on Baltimore Street back in 1989. But it gave us something in common. Pretty much the only thing we had in common at that age, except for the fact that we were both too young to fully be able to comprehend that Larry O'Brien was cursed. Now, I'd only been given token encouragement to pursue sports before Taekwondo. Little League came and went without so much as investing in a uniform. Soccer went much the same way, but Taekwondo stuck, and all of that credit belongs to Mrs. O'Brien, Larry's mother. Every class began with her lining us up in our little white smocks before her and casting a benediction over us. God, look at these big, strong boys. She savored those two adjectives as though they were closer to holiness than cleanliness. And whenever Larry and I were instructed to kick or punch something, her shouts of encouragement from the sidelines would drown ours out. The woman was mad for it, and her enthusiasm was outright contagious. And it was also her great contradiction. How such a tiny, gentle little Irish woman could commit her son so totally to a sport revolving around the disabling of another human being. But whatever Mrs. O'Brien's true motives were, they cast a shadow one particular day about 6 months into our training. We'd been paired up for group sparring, and Larry's partner miscalculated the difference between them, throwing a kick that landed right in his solar plexus, knocking the wind out of the 9-year-old's body. And his eyes went wide, and he fell on his ass, but he didn't cry. He didn't really even make a motion to. He was just so surprised to find himself where he was to have any reaction, really. But there was no such hesitation for his mother. Most of us in the room had no idea the accident had even happened, and so we had no idea why Mrs. O'Brien suddenly flew like a banshee into the middle of that dojo and grabbed a 9-year-old, almost as big as she was, and proceeded to shake him until his teeth rattled. "You get away from my son, you little bastard," she shrieked, and then, in that instant, realizing what she was doing, burst into inconsolable tears and had to be led outside to recover. And poor Larry was so beside himself, he just sat on his ass throughout, not speaking until the following week, and then only to nod in agreement when asked if he wanted to go get ice cream. My dedication to Taekwondo faltered, as it inevitably does with sports, just after I'd gotten my second band of electrical tape around my green belt. But Larry went on to receive first his black belt, and then another in Kung Fu, all at his mother's encouragement. In the years that followed, he racked up trophies in competitions and tournaments that Mrs. O'Brien was always in attendance to. He taught classes of his own when not in the school or gym, and by the time he turned 18, there was no possible denial that Larry O'Brien had become a force to be reckoned with. Now, Larry would go on from here very shortly thereafter to earn a degree in physical therapy, and then to marry a nice redhead, and then to have his first child shortly thereafter. These 3 quiet victories just gave no warning whatsoever that the man's peak had arrived and that the family curse was coming to claim him shortly thereafter. It was in the summer of 2000, and then a long-distance phone call came from Ireland informing Mrs. O'Brien that her father's body had been found by his cleaning lady, hanging from a noose he'd strung in the doorway. I was home from college to attend the man's funeral. It was thrown in his absentia by a kindly local priest who wanted to set Mrs. O'Brien's mind at ease. And then Larry O'Brien sat and I across from each other at the Grossmont Center Olive Garden for an early dinner that followed during the memorial. And we stuck to talk of martial arts, avoiding entirely the occasion for our being there. But every once in a while, Mrs. O'Brien would burst into tears from the end of the table, and we'd have to just keep our focus on our rubbery chicken parmesans and wait for it to pass. And then when she got control of herself, she'd look over and murmur, "At least I still have my big, strong boy." I was 19 and Larry was 21, but I was old enough to recognize the fear in his eyes every time his mother broke down. I wasn't old enough to quite understand why it was there, but I knew it was something other than sadness. The sound his mother made was of wild, unrestrained keening, a grief that knew bounds, and it was the same grief that had killed his grandfather and inevitably was his right by birth. It was only a few years later when Larry's own father passed away, not by his own hand, but by a stroke. He was declared brain dead after shortly being admitted into the emergency room, where by Catholic custom, he was to be removed from life support after receiving last rites. Now, I'm sure Mrs. O'Brien wanted her big, strong boy there with her that night, but this was a blow that Larry had never been trained to deflect, and so when the time came, he just rebelled. Instead, he crawled into the hospital bed with his own father and lay there like a child, inconsolable, but still willing to use all of his years of martial training to prevent anyone from killing his parent. It took the nearly widowed Mrs. O'Brien, a priest, and a small army of hospital staff to let the man pass. But Larry never recovered from that fight, and it was the only fight, to my mind, that the man ever lost. In the 4 years that followed, Mrs. O'Brien would confide that Larry was suffering terrible panic attacks. He'd stopped sleeping from some perpetual fear without name, and mood swings had made him doubt that he could raise his own family. Mrs. O'Brien, she tried to help out the best she could. She would suggest her son talk to their priest or seek therapy, but black belts do not talk about their feelings. And so Mrs. O'Brien changed tactics. She offered to take care of Larry's kids so he could spend some quality time with the wife, but his anxiety only deepened. "He's just going through such a rough time of it," Mrs. O'Brien lamented once. "My poor, big, strong boy." Now, when the call finally came that Larry himself had died, the report was actually merciful. His was declared an accidental death caused from prescription sleep aids mixed with alcohol, but the details among us who were predisposed to doubt, we read into them. The coroner had noted in his report that Larry's house was absolutely spotless. There was nary a dirty dish or a stray shoe to be found in the whole thing, and it was so in keeping with a man who had been raised to value discipline above his own limitations. But of course, no one mentioned such deaths to Mrs. O'Brien. She'd buried a father, a husband, and now her son, and her loss was so complete that it actually calmed her. She could wait the rest of her days with some security in the knowledge that nothing else could be taken from her. And I imagine now she's waiting still, but with all the clarity of hindsight to see how no amount of training could prepare Larry for his mind in its darker seasons. And I imagine that she's shocked to find that she, and she alone, is the master of defense in her own family. But how unbearably sensible must it sound when she replays the moments when that short red-headed kid remarked, offhandedly as kids will, that he never wanted to grow up. Thank you.
Justin Hudnall, everyone.